All right, before I get into the video, I wanted to quickly mention that I have a workshop coming up in Edinburgh, Scotland. That's right, I'm going back. I went last year, 2024, had an awesome time, worked with some great artists, beautiful school, and we're going to do it again. However, this time we're going to approach the portrait a little bit differently, but in a way that I think will let you get further on your portrait painting during the workshop and have more information you can take with you into your own studio. So come join me, Edinburgh, Scotland. That's March 17th, 2025, and I'll put that link down below. And just keep in mind, last time it sold out very quickly, so if you're interested, check that out, and I'll see you there. You know what, this is like the 85th time I've hit record on this, and I swear to God, I can't actually seem to speak well enough to make a YouTube video. So I've decided that I'm not going to turn this off. I might flub my words, but I'm just going to keep going because, my God, I can't seem to get through this YouTube video. Now, here's the thing about this YouTube video. I actually think what I'm going to talk about here is extremely useful, and in fact, I'm going to make two parts to this video. This video I can't make. I'm going to make two parts of it for some insane reason. But that's just because I really believe in the content I'm about to describe. Now, what I'm talking about in this video, I'm going to say it right now. I'm going to repel all of you right now because it doesn't sound interesting, but I promise it is. This thing, the thing I'm going to talk about in this video, is feedback loop or feedback loops. Now, I know that's not as enticing as, let's say, color theory or how to mix colors on the palette or flesh tones or how light works. I don't know if anyone's interested in that, but I can sell that more easily in a video. Feedback loops, if I put that on a video I was selling on my website, I'd get like negative sales. But feedback loops are extremely, extremely important. And they're sort of hidden inside the process. In fact, I would say it probably took me decades, nigh on decades, to realize the power of feedback loops. And if that makes no sense to you right now, I'm going to try to make it make sense. So a feedback loop inside the drawing and painting process. Let me kind of describe that. It's how each part of the process, or a part of the process from drawing to painting, whatever the process is you follow, it could be mine, it could be some variant of, or something entirely different. But each part of that process that you follow, assuming it's coherent, not just like some wild mess and you're flailing around. You might be. But if you have some kind of clear process with stages that you're aware of, it's how those different stages communicate to the other stages of your process. So my process, such as it is, as it's documented in all of these YouTube videos, videos on my website, Patreon. Yes, I have a page. You know what? Before I go on with the video, let me just promote myself a bit. If you want to see more content like this, if you want to support this channel, you can check, why am I looking at my fingers? You can check me out at patreon.com/ScottWaddell. Tons of content, $12 a month. You can go to my website if you don't like subscriptions. You can download videos there. They're yours to keep and watch as much as you like. Or you could even check out my online classes there on my website. That's scottwaddellfineart.com. Now, what was I talking about? Feedback loops. Okay. My process, my painting process, begins with a drawing. Now, I do my drawing on paper. You could do it directly on canvas. I like kind of figuring out placement on a sheet of paper and then transferring it and enlarging it or reducing it. That's almost never going to happen in my process, but adjusting the drawing until it's the right size for the canvas. Then I reinforce that with raw lumber paint, diluted raw lumber paint. I underpaint, and then I begin my form pass. I work through that methodically through all the parts, and then I do revision layers as much as needed until the painting is perfect and glorious, and angels just sing from above when they see it through the clouds. And that is essentially my process. So the way to talk about feedback loops in that context would be to talk about how that drawing in the beginning communicates with the painting at the very end. How that painting at the very end actually communicates with the drawing. Now, I can't time travel. I could maybe correct some drawing problems. Unfortunately, that's a reality sometimes. But what that does is it communicates with that beginning drawing process by pointing to the next project when you begin that next drawing for the next portrait, things you learned, feedback, you received from that final stage of painting will inform that drawing in the next project. And so there's a feedback loop between that drawing, the final painting, and the early drawing in the next painting. But that's true throughout the process. Let's take just the drawing stage as an example. So when I begin a drawing, I begin very loosely looking for large tilts, shapes. I work on the outside of the head or the outside of the figure or objects. I slowly work inward to the inner network of shapes. If it's a portrait, those would be the features. I really work those out, kind of lock into them, and then I work back out and I rework the outside now in that context. Then I roll the eraser over the whole thing and I enter into what I call or think of as the second stage of the drawing. At this point, I go back in and I find all of those lines again, and I think about the contour as three-dimensional form. If it was a three-dimensional object in front of me, a real head, where would my line of sight go around that form until I see an edge? If the light were coming from here, how would that form turn from that light until we reach a shadow edge? How would that form then cast a shadow and create a cast shadow edge? So these are very conceptual ways of looking at these lines and reinterpreting all those shapes. So the first part of the drawing was about getting those proportions right, looking at it as shapes. The second part of that drawing was reinterpreting all of those shapes, those lines, those tilts as three-dimensional information or three-dimensional form. Now, if I go into my next drawing knowing that I'm going to start thinking about this as form, I'll start anticipating things. When I put those shapes in, I'll think, hey, at some point, this needs to be the edge of a cheek. Hey, this needs to be a light source coming in from this angle. And when I go to this shadow over here, that same angle needs to relate. So there's a conceptual awareness. So the awareness, the feedback from that second stage, more sophisticated part of the drawing directly influences the beginning of my next drawings. And that feedback loop makes each new drawing better and better because I'm anticipating and thinking about, because of that feedback loop, what's going to happen next in that drawing. And in the same way, my second stage there, that conceptual framework, that sense of form and finding those three-dimensional lines and those shadow edges again, that's all going to be better, more successful, and fit into place better the better that early drawing is. So there is a feedback loop in that direction. And I see those things as being very connected. Now I want to make a little side note here because I think this is an important point that I'll come back to in a little bit within this video. If you just did exercises, if you just did little studies, and you only practiced the beginning portion of the drawing, like the rough block in, gesture drawings, you go to art leagues and every art college and you do like 0.9 second drawings, and maybe that's fine to warm up for a minute, but at some point you should honestly just do the drawing and go through all the steps, whatever your process is. I just told you mine has 2 stages. Yours could have 9 million. It could have 1.5. I don't know. But you need to go all the way through the drawing to establish that feedback loop. That's what you're trying to do when you actually try to see a project through to its end. So if you're doing a drawing, aside from a few warm-up exercises, that's totally fine. Get in the habit, for the most part, of doing an entire drawing. I don't mean shading it, but getting to the point where you're like, the nose goes here, for better or worse. I might suck, and that might look bad, but I'm going to eventually work to the point that I place it and really see where I'm at skill-wise and what my real ability is to place a nose, eyes, mouth, inside an overall head and have it all work together. Part of that is exposing you to where you're really truly at so you can find out what to work on. But more importantly, in this video, it's about establishing that feedback loop, going all the way to the end, seeing where the early drawing failed you. You'll get that feedback in that second half, and that directly goes into that next drawing. So you establish that loop. Now, we can play this out over the broader process too, because eventually you're going to take this drawing, and maybe you did it right on the canvas, perfectly fine. But in my case, I would take that drawing, I would transfer it to the canvas, I would reinforce it with my diluted raw umber, I would do my underpainting. These are all steps that are part of the feedback loop too. I'll come back to that in a moment because it's all connected. And eventually I'll start painting form. And if you've seen my videos, if you've seen my process, I find an area, I try to essentially finish as I go. I refine later, but I have a mindset that I'm finishing as I go. And I work through form by form by form. Well, if my early drawing isn't good, things are going to be very difficult if I don't trust where that eye goes, or I discover that the nose is too wide or skewed to the left, or the cheek is too robust on this one side. All kinds of things can become very evident, and that's a direct feedback loop between the painting stage, the form pass, and the early drawing, if those are big proportional issues. Or perhaps I didn't mature the second stage of the drawing enough. Maybe I didn't find how these forms overlap, or if there's foreshortening and we see a stack of a ball of a nose to a bridge of a nose to the glabella, and that's a very particular network of forms that I didn't really realize or think about or understand in the drawing stage. Well, that could really interfere with my interpretation as I'm painting. And this is especially true for those of you that work from life, and that's my background. I work from photo reference all the time, I know, but my entire background, and for a decade or more, was exclusively from life, or almost always exclusively from life, unless there was a commission or some unique project. And so I had many instances where I depended on myself, previous Scott, having really resolved the linear form and how those volumes fit together in that second stage of the drawing when it comes to painting, because the model's subtly moving, I'm moving in space, maybe I'm not perfectly aligned, maybe I'm sharing an environment with other artists, so I can't have the model move exactly back into the position I saw them. So by having a drawing that I reserved early on, in a linear sense, that stacks those forms together is extremely important to my performance when it comes to modeling form later on. That's a feedback loop between that second stage and modeling the form. Now, in a more material sense, you can have feedback loops that help you decide how to alter or change or perfect your process. And one of those things might be how you're underpainting. So for me, having an underpainting is extremely important because it prepares the surface to grip the paint. When I do my form pass, my form modeling in my process where I paint opaquely on the surface, sometimes I feel like I'm sliding around or I'm lifting paint off, whatever the case might be. Maybe there's an absorbency issue, and I find that that surface is optimized when I do an underpainting. So there could be a feedback loop between how you prepare the canvas, how you transfer the drawing, these sort of technical steps, and the results you're getting. And so that feedback loop is very, very important. And so you know what to change, and you can kind of listen to that conversation between those two steps through that feedback loop. And of course, how you lay down paint in the form pass could change how the paint handles when you begin to revise. So in my process, I do that form pass. I try to finish as I go, but inevitably I have to do 1, 2, 3 or more revision layers where I use increasingly translucent paint with medium, my refined linseed oil mixed into that color, and I do some kind of mixture of painting form and glazing to make these corrections. Well, if my surface isn't optimal for this, if my form pass is uneven, if I have a lot of starts and stops or seams and artifacts, revising can become more and more inconsistent and difficult. My paint surface might start to get very opaque and dead and lose that luminosity. So there are sort of aesthetic attributes to the paint quality itself that are part of this feedback loop. And of course, even things from that early drawing, like I said early on, can reveal deficits, or you can realize there are deficits in your overall technique or process when you get to those final stages, when you really see that there are drawing errors or certain things that you should have resolved, when you have to make very precise, definite decisions and statements about these things in that final part of the painting. So that feedback loop is all throughout. It's laced. It's like this, and then it's like this, and then it's like this. By being open to that and sort of listening to those feedback loops, you begin to anticipate things as you work sequentially through your project. So you still have to do the project in order, whatever your process is, and by paying attention to those feedback loops, you can start to identify things in the process that are working well, and there are always things that are working well, almost always. And you can start to then pay attention to things that are not working so well. And you might call these positive and negative feedback loops. For example, a negative feedback loop is when you're doing that painting and you're trying to travel across the form, and you keep realizing that there are proportional errors. Your cheek's too wide, your eye's too high, whatever it is. So that negative feedback loop is telling you that there's an issue with the drawing stage. Now, some of it could be very subtle, like maybe the shaping of the cheek isn't right, like the apex on the contour of where that zygomatic bone is, how the lacrimal area into the eye socket fits together. Those would be a feedback loop, a negative feedback loop to the second stage of the drawing when you're thinking about form. If you have the forehead way too high, or the jaw off to the right, or the ear too low in a significant way, those bigger things, those are placement issues in the early drawing. So that's a feedback loop to the painting process or the painting stage and the early drawing. So the next time you do that early drawing, you think, my God, that last time that ear was completely jacked up. The forehead was way too big. It was like cone heads and whatever else. So let me double the amount of time I'm doing drawing, or let me take like twice as many measurements, or let me try to, flip my eyes back and forth between the reference, the model, and my drawing, or look at a reflection in a mirror, whatever it is, whatever tools in your toolkit that help you sort of vet out those drawing problems, just know you need to spend more time on the next one because those were painful problems. And again, going back to the shaping of those forms and sort of that nuance and maybe where the septum lines up with the midline, things that are within a margin of error but not fitting together in a form way, spend more time in the second part of the drawing. Really think through those forms, anticipate it, work up to your lines, and in your imagination, imagine future you rendering this and modeling this, and think, God, next time I render a nose, I want to know how much that septum overlaps that far nostril hole, so on and so forth. I really want to think about the shape of the nasolabial fold going down to the corner of the mouth. I don't want that weird expression again. So let me hammer that out in these subtle linear ways in that second stage of the drawing. It's about anticipation and thinking about future you through these feedback loops. So you'll have no trouble finding those negative feedback loops because we're all sort of by default geared towards looking at the negative. But what you need to also do is find the positive feedback loops. What's working well? The fact that you're doing a drawing, for me anyway, you might not be doing this process. Maybe you're just throwing paint down and hoping for the best. But for me, a positive feedback loop is when I do a drawing, I unburden myself with trying to figure out proportions when it comes time to making color choices and modeling form. Another positive feedback loop is I really like having an underpainting. When I have an underpainting, and this is material, I feel like my paint in the next stage, the form pass, grips more securely. It could be even more material in that I do better when I don't add medium to my paint in the form pass, and then I start to introduce refined linseed oil in my revision pass. So there are technical sort of material feedback loops as well. And so some of those, and I'm established in my process, so I have a lot of positive feedback loops, but I'm attuned to the negative ones so I can make little adjustments or try different things. But you really want to look for positive feedback loops and negative feedback loops. And the positive ones are so important. Those are like your fence posts, right? Like you need to have that so you have stability. You don't want to just destroy your entire process every time you start a project and start from scratch. You want to have a certain amount of stability and change little things. Like I really need to spend more time in the drawing. I need to take more measurements. I really need to improve my form conception in that second half of the drawing. I need to make some adjustments to how much paint I'm putting down in that form pass because I'm not getting enough coverage. And when I start to revise, my coverage is very paltry and sort of inconsistent. And so then when I add layers, the way it dries is really, really messed up and has all kinds of artifacts. So I need to get more even and consistent in my paint application in my form pass, let's say. So those are some negative feedback loops that fit into a framework of positive feedback loops. And by having that stability and having a stable structure, or a stable process, I should say, you really can begin to repeat this, go from A to Z drawing to the finished painting in a very productive way and very specifically keep certain things the same and address things that are causing problems. And that's where the real growth is. So having a stable process, and I know there's that definition of insanity that I don't even know if it's a correct quote, but it's like the definition of insanity per Einstein supposedly is repeating the same thing and expecting different results. It's actually completely wrong. I have no idea if he actually said it or not. I didn't do any research here, but I always hear that, and it's one of the most irksome, silly quotes because when you're trying to get good at something, you do have to repeat it a lot. And maybe there are some things that just become apparently incorrect, but there's also things that you might do because you sort of think that they're viable, they make sense, they're logical and rational, and you also see other artists that are making artwork you like doing it, you're just not good at it yet. So you have to repeat it. And yeah, you can expect different results, the second, third, fourth, fifth time if you're diligent and patient about it, because sometimes it just takes time for you to get better and to catch up with that. That's not to say that there aren't terrible processes out there. I'm sure that there are. Like, I don't think painting with the soles of your shoes is a great idea if you're trying to paint, traditional form. But you can do it, maybe. I don't know. I'm sure somebody out there could probably do it, and make some viral videos about it. But I think that it's fair to say there are bad processi, and there are processes that are better and more viable. So find one that you like, whether it's mine from my videos or some other artist who's painting in a coherent way and has a process they lay out in their content that you can follow along with, and then try to keep it relatively stable. Find those positive feedback loops, things that are working with each time you do a project in that particular method, and then the things that are not quite working in a very identifiable way, not just because you're not good at it yet, but the paint wasn't sticking or my drawing was totally out of proportion. That's a pretty clear thing that you can try to correct next time you draw and paint. Now, why is this all important? Well, it's important for all the reasons I listed, hopefully, but it's also very important because it can help you decide what projects to work on. So for example, if you got into some mode where you thought you ought to master each stage before you got to the next and play that out over many years, then that might be a mistake. And what I mean by that is kind of what you find when you go to some of these traditional schools like ateliers and academies that teach you drawing for an entire year. And not only do they teach you drawing, they teach you a certain kind of drawing. You'll copy Bargue plates, these 19th century plates by Charles Bargue. You'll do cast drawing in graphite or charcoal. Then you'll do grisaille painting, monochromatic painting. Then you'll do figure drawing in graphite or charcoal. Then you'll do monochromatic grisaille figure painting. And again, this plays out over many, many, many years. And that first year or more will just be the drawing stage. And this produces a mindset that I've seen in many artists I've worked with inside that environment, because I've taught in that, I studied in that environment, and I worked in that environment teaching many years. It produces a mindset where a person thinks they have to absolutely master drawing before they ever start painting. And even within drawing, they feel like they have to master the first step to the drawing process, finding those proportions, before they start maturing that drawing and developing it even further, that second stage I talked about. Then there's a mindset that they ought to master values, monochromatic painting, before they ever attempt color, and things like that. Well, I don't know that I would talk anyone out of studying at those schools, because some of them are fantastic. I studied in them, I taught them, and there are so many wonderful artists that go through that. But I'll tell you something else that sounds very common sense that I really learned in my 11 years or more now teaching online. The best way to get better at portrait painting is portrait painting. And what I mean by that is going through that whole process, A to Z, drawing, whatever steps in between, they could be mine, all the way to that final painting, and then repeating it, starting another drawing and going all the way to the end and seeing that one completely through. And why is that? Feedback loops, because you are seeing how all of it ties together. If you're only practicing drawing, if you're only just doing exercises, little block-ins from the first part of the drawing process, it's fine if you do it for a few weeks. But if this plays out for a really long time, then you're not seeing how it all connects together. You're not finding those feedback loops, not only within the drawing, but the drawing into a viable way for transferring into painting, laying out values. You could do a monochromatic underpainting as part of your process if you want to figure out values first, but then seeing how that relates to color. That feedback loop is tremendous. And I work with people all the time that maybe haven't mastered the skill of drawing. They haven't. They just haven't learned how to draw very accurately yet. But they want to work on portrait painting. And you know what? We do it. And I help them figure out feedback loops within that drawing process. They get that drawing more and more accurate. Then they advance through the painting, but there's still drawing errors because they haven't mastered it yet. But then they begin to see drawing in a different light. They get to see spacing, like in terms of form, and that will inform drawing decisions next time. And then they go through and they think about color. They get experience dealing with color. So by going through that whole process, you get that benefit now, not a year from now. And then you start the next one, and you have all of that white hot experience, painful experience from painting that last portrait and all those lessons learned. And now you're applying it or anticipating it in your next block in drawing. You're thinking, my God, I'm going to have to paint this cheek. I have to paint this cheek in like a week, 2 weeks. And that last time was horrible. It was really horrible. So I'm going to make sure it's the right width now. I am, because I'm going to paint this in a week. And then you do that with the nose, and you do it with everything, and you make that drawing perfect, because now you're thinking, like, I have to paint this. And that plays out throughout everything. And you could think about that if you do, in fact, install a part of your process, like a monochromatic grisaille underpainting. Not something I do, but you could do that. And maybe that's working very well for you. And you could think, like, I really want to get those values correct so I can unburden myself with that question when it gets to hue and chroma choices, because color is really the area I get caught up on. So you can really benefit by maximizing these feedback loops through going through that whole process. You need to have a coherent process that you can more or less repeat. You need to have those negative feedback loops, the things that aren't working, along with those positive feedback loops, the things that are working, so you can maintain that stability. The stability, a clear process, repeating it over and over, and going from A to Z, seeing the whole thing through. Here's my task for you. I don't know you, but here's a goal you can give yourself. 4 out of 5 things you do, finish. 4 out of 5. So give yourself that one that's just so bad it's horrible, and you can just give yourself the pleasure of quitting and rubbing it out, destroying it, and stabbing the canvas. 1 for every 4 you do. The rest of them, finish them. I don't care if it's painful. If it's painful, look at it as a way to practice these feedback loops. What are you learning from this? And when you get negative like that, when it starts to really go bad, that's when you have to pause and think, this is the moment I need to also look for those positive feedback loops, those things that are working. I want to have stability here. I want to have some structure to my process that I keep the same, so that I can more effectively find and change the things that aren't working. Thank you so much for checking out this video. If you like my content, you can support this channel by going to patreon.com/ScottLiddell, and there you can get access to tons of tutorials and see me paint portraits, figure, still life, thousands of hours of content on there. And you can cancel anytime. You can also go to my website. If you don't like subscriptions, you can check out my downloadable videos. That's scottliddellfineart.com. When you buy those, they're yours to keep. And you can also check out my online classes and study online one-on-one with me.